to take over now. I'm Nicholas Bakirtzis, and we are now going to be talking and hearing from Luca Zavagno about his book, The Byzantine City, from Heraclius to the Fourth Crusade, 610 to 1204, published by Palgrave, Macmillan. And like in the previous sessions, I think everybody's familiar with the way that this is done. You can pose questions in the Q&A chat box. So let me briefly introduce Luca Zavagno, and also I want to express my thanks to the organizers and Petros Bouras for the invitation. Luca Zavagno is Associate Professor of Byzantine Studies in the Department of History at Bilkent University. He studied at the Ca' Foscari University of Venice and completed his doctorate at the University of Birmingham. His research publications and teaching concentrate on the study of the early medieval and Byzantine Mediterranean, and of course, on Byzantine cities and urbanism. His first two books, Cities in Transition, Urbanism in Byzantium between late antiquity and the early Middle Ages, and Cyprus between late antiquity and the early Middle Ages, an island in transition, reflect these interests and have also established Luca's rich synthetic and pragmatic scholarly perspective in the field. He worked with Özlem Çekent in the edited volumes Islands of Eastern Mediterranean, A History of Cross-Cultural Encounters, and People and Goods on the Move, Merchants, Networks and Communications Routes in the Medieval and Early Modern Mediterranean. We have also recently completed together the edition of the Routledge Companion to the Byzantine City, hopefully appearing within the next year. And we are here today on the occasion of the publication, as I mentioned, of his third book. Luca has also received numerous scholarships, awards, and grants. His work has been supported by Dumbarton Oaks, the Seeger Center for Hellenic Studies at Princeton, Newton Mobility Grant, the DEA Fondation Maison de Sciences et de l'Homme. He's also the co-organizer of the Byzantium in Ankara Seminar Series, Associate Scholar of the Mediterranean Seminar, member of the Princeton University Framing the Early Medieval Coinage Project, and visiting professor in the Byzantine art history at the University of Venice. So it's my pleasure to present today's book. And I want to briefly comment on it before we hear from Luca himself. It's an insightful and much needed study which addresses various gaps in our understanding of the development of Byzantine cities after the end of antiquity through the beginning of the 13th century. It provides impressive as well as truly valuable overviews of long scholarly debates and ideas which have shaped our established notions of the Byzantine city and the transition from polis to castrum. This is a most welcome and needed contribution of Luca's book, as we are now able to rethink and revisit topics and themes which we have for long taken for granted. What is really important is that besides reassessing literary and hagiographic sources, Luca's work engages archaeological work which can help examine regional and sub-regional trajectories in the urban function, landscape, structure, and fabric of Byzantium's cities. Archaeology certainly challenges issues related to the development, the continuity, and discontinuity of the rise and fall of Byzantine cities, the transformation the Byzantine urban landscape underwent from the 7th to the 13th centuries can afford us a better grasp of changes to the Byzantine central and provincial administrative apparatus, their fiscal machinery, military institutions, socio-economic structures, and religious organization. Of course, I could go on, but now we'll ask Luca to take the virtual podium. Luca, good to see you.
Thank you, Nikos. Same here, Nick. So I would like also to thank myself, the University of Edinburgh and Petros Bouras for organizing this wonderful event, and also obviously, of course, Nikos, who has been a friend, over the past 15 years, and also a constant source for intellectual conversation and invaluable scholarly feedback on many of my recent projects, including this book. And I would like to share the screen now, if possible. Can you see it, the screen? Is it fine? or you see it as a presenter?
I see it okay, and I think everybody should be seeing it all right.
Okay, okay.
Luca,
So,
go ahead.
one of the main ideas behind this book was to present the reader with an overview of both the most significant contribution in the field and the diverse interpretative and analytical approaches which have characterized the debate on Byzantine city over the past 75 years or so. The time span of the book is broad, and it covers roughly the periods which have been traditionally labeled as by historiography as middle and late Byzantine. In other words, I was trying to cover or to propose a diachronic perspective which encompassed the period which goes from the making of Orthodox Byzantium, the beginning of the making of Orthodox Byzantium, through the empire that would not die, and to the 11th and 12th century until the catastrophic sack of Constantinople, which dealt a fatal blow to the empire. So in terms of urbanism, this is a period in which an empire, famously described as mosaic of cities and drawn as a dense constellation of urban centers, changed its character and structure as it entered the Middle Ages. It is a period for which Byzantinists have often tried to look for a one-size-fits-all model of urbanism, as Nikos has already referred to, a journey from polis to castro in a sense. And in fact, I was trying to be on the lookout for the visible Byzantine city, to move away from this model, from this interpretative model, and try to be on the lookout for the visible Byzantine city, and try to move beyond what have been described as the literary and not shadows and imaginary cities as a reflection of the one capital. And the reference to Constantinople is not a chance here. It's not something that I'm mentioning by chance, because if you type the word Byzantine cities in Wikipedia, which is clearly inevitable, and the unavoidable reference point for the beginning of any research on any topic these days, well, if you type these words in Wikipedia or not, what you get is a repetitive list of results, or in which Constantinople captures the lion's share. And the same, for what is worth, since we are living in the metaverse age, the same can be said for video games, or for, as I said, the augmented reality we are all dealing with, because in places like, in games like Minecraft and Assassin's Creed, which are very famous, Constantinople is the only Byzantine city which can be found. So another idea behind the book was to look indeed beyond the queen of cities and propose a regional and sub-regional overview of the transformation of the imperial urban context across the 6 centuries, spanning from Heraclius, more or less, to Alexius V, and analyze the changes in terms of landscape, structure, and fabric in a comparative perspective. And this by taking into consideration the peculiar geomorphological and topographical varieties of both the Byzantine heartland, the Aegean and the Anatolian Plateau, the Aegean Sea and the Anatolian Plateau, as well as the so-called coastal insular Kine. I've indeed tried to highlight a functional variety of responses to the social, political, and economic changes at the Mediterranean scale, as they determine the creation of different and often coexisting models of urbanism, including the one or the so-called one, the one called City of Islands. A second point which I tried to set forth in the book, the City of Islands is here, is a very good example from Gortyn, Crete, which is one of the best excavated sites in the Byzantine, in the period under scrutiny here. So a second point I tried to drive home had to do with an attempt to paint a picture of the main historiographical trends, interpretative structures, and methodological questions concerning Byzantine urbanism, and identify some possibly future line of analytical inquiry. In this line, I've tried to move beyond the so-called continuities-discontinuities dichotomy, and I advocated for a definition of city, as I've partially mentioned already, as a multifunctional settlement A definition which must take into consideration the historical trajectories of the empire at large, as well as the changing patterns of investment, socio-cultural attitudes, political roles, and social relevance of urban-based elites. Indeed, as Byzantium remained an urbanized empire throughout its entire existence, one should consider how each region boasted rather fluid and variable government structures and political allegiances. To the center, as local urban elites showed a unique understanding of the socio-economic, military, and cross-cultural dynamics characterizing the urban life in the medieval Byzantine Mediterranean. And here I want to summon a couple of examples which will help to drive my point home. One, which is already on the screen, is the city of Amorion, the second most probably, actually, the second best excavated site, if not the first one, together with Gortin. I don't know where to put them. I mean, if to put them on equal foot, but they're very important, both of them. So the Amorion as a first example, a thematic capital, very well excavated site, very well published. And as you can see on the slide, this wonderful reconstruction of the settlement pattern of the city, a rather dense, so not a city of islands, as I showed before, but a rather dense settlement pattern divided into a lower city and the upper city, both encased by walls. I will return to walls in a second, boasting ecclesiastical buildings and an economic and socio-cultural resilience, which went beyond the catastrophic sack of the Arabs in 813-8. The city had or showed artisanal and commercial activity, and this archaeology has proved, courtesy of the work of Eric Ivison and Chris Lightfoot, among the others. And when I said artisanal and commercial activities, I'm referring to even local amphora production, wineries, and later even agricultural activity processing agricultural goods. So this is the first example. And the second one, which allows me to return to the City of Islands model, is Amalfi, which is a rather peculiar and not to the fullest Byzantine maybe city, but it's a place where which show us that urban functions do not necessarily or did not necessarily coalesce into a central place, and show us the need of weighing the transformation experienced by urbanism and to illuminate the fluctuating use of public and private space, the conversion of monumental landscape, the changes to spatial structures, and where city life and how city lives could manifest, in a sense, itself through political ceremonies, religious procession, and or market activities, which are inspired or loosely inspired by Byzantine models. And finally, the third, and Amalfi is basically also reminding us of the importance of taking into consideration the functional changes I was mentioning, in terms of different regional and sub-regional trajectories, as I referred to at the very beginning of this short presentation. And at the same time, when we deal with regional and sub-regional models, we are reminded of the importance of an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach, which is most probably the third point I wanted to drive home in the book, which should allow us to pay literary and material sources. And although urban archaeology has, as Nikos mentioned, the pride of place, because it had drastically developed in the past decades, together with the analysis of material indicators, and has shed light on previously unsuspected avenues of connectivity. But obviously, one should not overlook the importance of the literary and documentary sources, or regard them simply as a corollary to material evidence. And in both instances, both for literary sources and for archaeology, we should be fully aware of the biases that we have confronted by and we are facing in terms of literary and documentary sources, but also in terms of archaeology, and in particular the latter, the drawbacks of archaeology, as I mentioned on the slides, has in a sense pushed us to move away from a quest from documenting the narrative and literary sources, and acknowledge that the relationship between text and material culture is more complex and more enriching than often thought for archaeological evidence, although archaeological evidence indeed has plenty of drawbacks. Here I will move quickly to one of the examples that archaeology is helping us to better grasp, in a sense, and is the role of walls. And Nikos has been worked on urban fortifications a lot, and has showed the importance of reading those fortifications as a sort of palimpsest of the different functions of the city. I may return to that later on because I'm running out of time here. So, and this idea, in a sense, of dealing or considering both the drawback but the recent advancement of archaeology has also allowed me to, or I hope I managed to widen the scope of this book, and moving, as I was telling before, out of the Roman Mediterranean ordinary, if you like, and try to consider how the Mediterranean transitioned from a unified Mare Nostrum to a more fragmented but still interconnected Great Sea. And in doing that, I also tried to point out, once again in a functional way, the fact that a different idea or ideal of the city, which were represented, for instance, by Monet and Bazillac, a connected city, but at the same time a city which show a different way, a different urban planning. And this is the reference to the connection. I was to the connecting to the fact that Monet and Bazillac was at the heart of a connective or corrupting sea, as Orden and Purcell are mentioning. So, as I was saying, trying to enlarge, to broaden their horizon of the traditional, which traditional urban historiography as used in order to examine Byzantine city. So in the end, I tried not to gloss over the struggle for survival which the Byzantine Empire faced, for natural catastrophe and warfare dominated a large part of the 7th to 9th century, but rather to stress that chronological and geographical variation do not entail any generalization, because the whole state, the whole Byzantine state, obviously did not disintegrate overnight. And therefore, I propose a rather diachronic approach, which I hope was framed by this idea of a fragmentation of the Mediterranean shipping routes and networks of exchange, but at the same time, delving into the reorganization of the administrative, political, and military imperial structures, which for the most part remained in place through the 11th century crisis and until the arrival of the Norman and the Seljuks, and finally until the 4th Crusade. So that's it from me